Another story of a true story of narcissistic abuse in couples therapy. So we're going to change the names to protect the innocent, uninnocent, and myself. So we're going to go with Chuck and Betty. Chuck being the narcissist, and Betty is the survivor. So they had been in a relationship for 3 years, on and off again, with all the abuse in between and everything else. So she was going to therapy herself and had been for years. So she thought it would be a great idea for Chuck to go to therapy because she couldn't figure out why he acted the way he acted. And she wanted him to get better so they could have a nice relationship and everything would be normal. So she approached him and said, hey, I've been going to therapy. I think that it would be a good idea for you to go to therapy. Well, he took it as couples therapy. So he said, sure, we can go if you set it up. And so then she thought, well, I will set that up because maybe during this therapy, he will see that he needs to go to therapy and maybe the therapist will catch on that he's, not right, that he needs some changes to make, not knowing what narcissism is. So she made a few phone calls and set it up. Now they weren't living together at the time because it was on the off, trying to get back together for the on again. You see what I'm saying? So they did go to couples therapy and the introductions were in and he took the floor. He complained about everything about her that was so petty, toothpaste in the sink, not putting the toilet seat all the way down, not doing certain little stupid things, that were didn't even mean anything. But he took up all the time and she kept thinking, when's it going to be my turn? Well, when the time it was ended, she never got a turn. So then she thought, well, next time I'll go. And maybe it'll be my turn and I can bring up to her the behaviors of what he does, to try to figure out how we can improve that. Well, so they went back the next week and they were like talking on the phone in between and texting each other and stuff like that, but they weren't like going out or anything like that. And so again, he took over the floor. And this time it was even rougher. So he was blaming her for actually things that he did, but he had twisted it around to make it her fault. And she kept thinking, no, it wasn't that bad. And she started going on to the defensive, because she's trying to defend herself. And so then it got to be her turn. And, of course, therapists, I don't know if anybody's ever been to a therapist, but they always say this. And how does that make you feel? I hate that. So, and she said, well, number one, that's not true. I didn't do it like that. That's not how I did it. And he over exaggerated everything. So now she's on the defensive, not being able to explain what is bothering her. And so then it ended. But at the end, the therapist said, I think it would be a good idea if you guys at least went out on a date a week, and don't talk about therapy. And maybe, we can work this out because everything's workable. Well, of course, because the therapist thinks it's all her fault. So they tried that, but she was Betty was so like upset, because she's on the defensive, wondering why basically he's over exaggerated and twisted the truth around to make it look worse than it was. So she called him on it on one of these dates, and he was just, we won't do this anymore, and I'm not going to do this if you're going to be, wanting to argue after therapy. We're not supposed to talk about it and all this stuff. It was just really awful. So then they went again, and again he took over the floor. Well, so she just kind of stared at the therapist and then raised her hand, and said, you know, so far this has been all about my what I do and how he perceives what I do, and I'm not that bad and I don't want to be on the defensive, but when is it my turn to talk? And so the therapist said, well, let him finish and we will make sure that you have time to talk on the next one. Well, this one even got worse. So basically, it made her look like a narcissist. And obviously, the therapist didn't even know what narcissism was. Otherwise, she would have picked up the gaslighting, the twisting of words, the blame shifting, the whole 9 yards. And the therapist never really picked it up. So they continued to go out on these dates and stuff, but it was hard not to get in a fight because of all the stuff that he had said in therapy. It was like he was setting her up to be the bad guy, go on the defense, lose her cool, and do the reverse abuse on him during therapy. And he almost succeeded, except the next time the therapist, true to her words, said, "Okay, it's your turn." But now Betty was afraid to say anything. She did not want him to go into a rage on her, after the session, and she really truly wanted things to get back together. So she just brought up some little light things. And he totally was calm and cool and collected. Like, well, it's all and always had an excuse for everything. So he'd just be looking at her like, well, I would do that, but I don't think you've ever asked me to. I mean, it just really looked like she was so dysfunctional. Well, so the therapist, promised her the next session she would have too. And if there's anything that she needs to say it out. So she had it all in her head. She had written down a list of things that he's doing, and basically abusive things that he was doing, to talk about the next session. Well, he knew. So he cancels the session. He canceled the session. And she gets a call from the therapist and says, "Well, everything's been canceled. I wanted to know if you knew that he had canceled." And she had no idea. So she called him and said, "Why did you cancel the session?" And he goes, "Because it's not doing either one of us any good." So you see, competition. Narcissists love competition. They're going to win, and that's at all costs. So when they're in therapy, they're going to win this. They are not going to be the bad guy, and that's not what therapy is about. Therapy is actually about joining together, working out your problems in a relationship, and so that you can have a better relationship. But to a narcissist, it's competition, and they're going to beat you at it, and they do, and they will do it at any cost. And so beware, if you go to therapy or you want to do a therapy session with a narcissist or an abusive toxic person, make sure that that therapist is aware and knows about narcissism, so that they can help you get that person, either into therapy or work with them to where it could be maybe a little better and doable in a relationship. So that's a true story. She did go on and went back to the narcissist, and it was like a year later she was discarded, and now she is a survivor of narcissistic abuse and doing very well, but it was a lesson learned. If you like this story, please like and subscribe. Thanks.